Healthy eating out. Is that even possible? Is it possible to find heart-healthy foods at restaurants? Well, I will admit it is very difficult. But today we will look at some tips and tricks that we can use at the restaurant to try to find some healthier items that will fit into our nutrition goals. Before we get to those tips and tricks about making healthy choices at restaurants, I do want us to think about how often we eat a restaurant meal. We're going to find out today that finding foods that are low in sodium or low in saturated fat or meals that have an appropriate amount of calories at a restaurant is very difficult. So if someone is eating at a restaurant often, several times a week, following a heart-healthy diet becomes very, very challenging. And when we look at trends across our nation, we tend to eat out more today than we ever have before. More people in America are eating out. In fact, more than a third of American adults will eat at a fast food restaurant on any given day. 10 years ago, there was a shift in how much money we spent at restaurants compared to what we spend at the grocery store on foods to prepare at home. Most families spend more on restaurant meals than they do for their foods at home. It's an interesting shift that we've seen. And why is that? Why do we see so many families and individuals and couples relying on restaurants to prepare their food instead of cooking at home? Well, there's a lot of different reasons for this shift that we've seen over the last couple decades. One, we tend to have very busy schedules. Whether we're a young family and we have kids involved in activities and our evenings are very busy, or maybe we're a retired couple and eating out is an opportunity for us to go meet up with friends, a social event, or just an opportunity for us to get out of the house. Sometimes we're busy in cardiac rehab. We go there several times a week. We have follow-ups with one doctor, follow-ups with another doctor, and often we have to just catch a meal in between our appointment times. Those busy schedules have resulted in us relying on restaurant meals. Also, frequent travel. I talk to patients often that travel is part of their job. So when they are traveling overnight, for instance, relying on restaurants for a lot of their meals during the week is almost a necessity. It's also very convenient. With our busy schedules, we have gotten accustomed to very convenient options with foods. I mean, even if we wanted to get a takeout, we don't even have to leave our home. We can call and have the food delivered by any type of food delivery system. That's the ultimate convenience. Also, eating out sometimes is a social opportunity. I once had a patient who said every Friday night he and his wife would take their grandchildren out to eat. It was a tradition for them. And what a great tradition. What an opportunity to build relationships. And sometimes those social gatherings are surrounded or centered on food. So it's not always a bad thing. But we do have to think about how often we go out to eat. In fact, when you look at a study called the National Weight Control Registry that looks at people who have lost weight and kept it off, one of their healthy habits that allows them to maintain that weight loss is they don't eat out very often. The average was less than 3 times a week, and they ate fast food less than 1 time a week. So when I'm talking to a patient who has a goal of weight management or a goal of eating healthier, we have to look at how frequently they eat out, and I ask them that question. So I want you to think about this question right now. In a typical week, there's about 21 meals, 7 days, 3 meals a day. Out of those 21 meals, how many meals would come from a restaurant? I always ask my patients that, and I get a variety of answers. Sometimes it's 1 or 2 times a week. I had one gentleman tell me 19 out of the 21 meals in a week would come from a restaurant. Him and I had a real long talk that day. So think about your number. If it's somewhere around 4, 5, 6 or more times per week, we should consider if there's any way we can reduce how often we go to the restaurant. Anytime we can reduce that and cook more at home, we're going to have the opportunity to make a much healthier meal. There are a lot of different reasons why we may choose a particular restaurant. Sometimes that reason is our health. We're thinking about trying to order something healthy. But a lot of times we aren't even considering our health or our nutrition goals when we choose a restaurant. Sometimes we choose a place simply based on convenience. Maybe it's located on our drive home from work and it's easy to pick something up and bring it home. Maybe it's located between my morning doctor appointment and my afternoon cardiac rehab. Maybe they have freebies or deals. Restaurants that offer free kids meals on certain nights. That'll be something that could pull me into that restaurant because I'm thinking about my budget. A lot of different reasons. And sometimes I get asked the question, well, what would a healthy restaurant choice be? Allison, give me the name of a healthy restaurant, and that's where I'll go. Unfortunately, that's a hard question to answer because even restaurants that feel like they might be healthier, well, sometimes they do have healthy options, but a lot of times there's plenty on their menu that wouldn't fit well into a heart-healthy diet. And even restaurants that we don't think as particularly healthy may have a few items on their menu that make good choices. So we'll look today at how we can prioritize our health no matter what restaurant we're at and try to find choices that will fit inside our healthy diet to help with our nutrition goals. 10 tips for eating out and staying healthy. Number 1, look before you leap. This talks about things we can do before we even get to the restaurant. And of the 10 tips we're going to talk about today, this is one that I feel can be the most important or effective when trying to make good choices. And that's to take the time to look up nutrition information before we go to the restaurant. Have we ever done that? Most chain restaurants offer nutrition information available online. We probably have noticed that they have been printing the calorie information directly on their menus. This was a law that was brought in a couple years ago, and this is really helpful information, especially if weight management is our goal. We can get an idea of how many calories are in the different items and be able to compare items on the menu to choose something that's in an appropriate calorie level. But the other nutrition information, like the sodium content of a meal or the saturated fat content of the meal, or even the carbohydrate content if I'm diabetic and carb counting, that information is often available, but it's just not printed on the menu. Large chain restaurants who have done a nutrition analysis for the calorie information should also have the full nutrition information available online. The easiest way to do it is to go to a search engine like Google and enter the restaurant name and then the phrase nutrition information PDF. When we put PDF at the end, we usually get the full printable document that has all of the nutrition information. So if I was searching it for Panera Bread, I could put Panera Bread nutrition information PDF. And what I'm going to find is all of the nutrition information for every menu item they have. So the calorie content, carbohydrate content, saturated fat, total fat, sodium, dietary fiber, protein, all of that nutrition information is available. And this allows me to make a great choice when I go to the restaurant. I think you'll be surprised at what a difference there is between different menu items. So when I know that information, I can make a good choice. Now, I have had patients ask me before, well, how reliable do you think that information is? And that's a valid question. I mean, there's a human being back in the kitchen preparing that food. They may do things a little bit differently. But the reality is, restaurants have very standardized recipes. They want consistency. A restaurant like Chili's in Knoxville, Tennessee, wants their chicken fajitas to taste the same as the chicken fajitas at the Chili's in North Carolina. Chain restaurants want consistency across all of their different restaurants. So they have very strict standardized recipes. Standardized recipes also make it easier for ordering ingredients back in the kitchen. So while there is a human being preparing the food and there is the possibility for some variation in how your particular meal is prepared, the overall nutrition information is going to be pretty close because of those standardized recipes. Another thing to think about is If we arrive at a restaurant very, very hungry, it's easy to overeat. So if I'm very, very hungry, I might think about having maybe an apple or a low-fat mozzarella cheese stick, maybe an hour before I go to the restaurant, or have a tall glass of water that I drink in the car on the way to the restaurant. If I have something that can kind of take the edge off that hunger, I'm likely to have better appetite control and portion control when I get to the restaurant. What a difference it makes to know the nutrition facts. When I choose a restaurant like Panera Bread, a lot of times I choose that restaurant because it feels healthier. We know they have fresh items, and we feel like, well, that must be a healthy choice, much better choice than a typical fast food restaurant. And while that may be the case for some of the choices on their menu, there's certainly things on the menu at that restaurant that we would not want to choose. So when we print the nutrition information or look the nutrition information up, say on our phone or our computer, it allows us to make a better choice. In fact, if you have some restaurants that you eat at fairly often, perhaps it's located near your work or near your home, I recommend that you actually print the nutrition information off and take some time to go through it. Highlight entrees or side dishes that are good choices, and that way we have a good plan, a game plan when we go into the restaurant. Panera offers a choose two for their lunch and dinner items, where you choose a half a sandwich and either a cup of soup or a half a salad, along with your choice of a side dish, which would be a sprouted grain roll, an apple, or chips. So depending on my choices in that choose two menu, I'm going to result in a very different nutrition intake at the meal. If I choose half of the Chipotle chicken avocado melt and a cup of the bistro French onion soup along with a sprouted grain roll, again, this sounds like a fairly healthy option, but it has 11 grams of saturated fat. If you'll remember from our other discussions, our recommended limit for saturated fat is for about 12 to 15 grams for the whole day. So that's almost a whole day's worth of saturated fat. And the sodium, it is an entire day's worth of sodium in that meal. 2,310 milligrams of sodium in that one meal at Panera Bread. Less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium is the recommended goal, and if we have high blood pressure, less than 1,500 milligrams per day is the recommended sodium limit. I think what you'll find as we look at nutrition facts and as we talk today is that the sodium is extremely high at restaurants. Often we can find something on the menu that's going to be lower in saturated fat or calories, but the sodium will still be exceptionally high. It's almost impossible to get away from it at restaurants. And that's why I suggest thinking about how often we eat at the restaurant. But back to Panera Bread. If I do another choose to option, this time I choose half the Napa almond chicken salad sandwich on country rustic bread, the half strawberry poppy seed salad, and choose the apple as my side dish. Now I'm only getting 2.5 grams of saturated fat. That's going to fit within my daily limit of 12 to 15 grams much easier. And only 400 milligrams of sodium, which is very appropriate for a meal to fit into my daily total. What a difference it makes to know those nutrition facts. Another example of what a difference knowing the nutrition facts can make would be at Chili's. If we chose their seared shrimp fajitas with the toppings, which would be the peppers and the onions and then the condiment tray, and 4 flour tortillas, I even left off the rice and the beans in this example. This item has almost 5,000 milligrams of sodium and more than 2 days worth of saturated fat for some people. And this, again, might seem like a healthier item. It isn't a red meat item. It isn't a deep fried item. Sodium is going to be typically very high in restaurants. And sometimes I get asked why. Why is the sodium content so exceptionally high? And there's a couple different reasons why this may be the case. One, sodium is a preservative. And restaurants can't afford to be throwing away food. That affects their profit. So they need foods that will last a long time in the freezer or the refrigerator. So chicken is often stored in a brine solution or marinated. Shrimp is often frozen in a salt solution. So salt also provides flavor in a very inexpensive way. If we think about the cost of spices in the grocery store, we may pay $6 for a container of dill, but salt costs less than $1. So restaurants are going to use a little bit of spices and herbs, but they're going to rely heavily on salt to season and flavor their food because it's so inexpensive. So even if I half the order of the shrimp, let's say I share it with the person I'm dining with, I'm still consuming more than an entire day's worth of sodium in that meal. Now I could also order a different option at Chili's. This one is actually a BLT lunch combo. That's right, B as in bacon. If I get the BLT combo with the fresco salad and leave off the French fries, it's still relatively high in sodium, about 760. I'd have to be careful on what I eat the rest of the day, but it's a much more reasonable option compared to the shrimp fajitas. Looking up that nutrition information can make a big difference. Number 2 is a little behavior trick we can do when we go to the restaurant. Be the first one at the table to place your order. Have you ever been sitting at a restaurant and you're looking at the menu? Maybe you're looking at the grilled salmon and thinking about a side order of steamed broccoli. But then your friend orders and they've chosen the double bacon cheeseburger. And we think to ourselves, well, that sounds good. And we change our order. We are influenced by other people's choices. They have studies that show we tend to mirror what other people choose when they go out to eat. If people at the table are choosing indulgent choices, we're more likely to make indulgent choices. Where if people around us are ordering healthy foods, we're more likely to order healthy foods as well. So when we're the first ones to order, we're going to avoid being swayed or influenced by other people at the table. And we might actually set a healthy tone for the table and encourage someone else to make a good choice. Tip number 3, rethink the drink. Replacing a sugary beverage like a Coca-Cola or a sweet tea or a lemonade with water is one of the easiest ways we can reduce the calorie intake of our restaurant meal without giving up satisfaction. Sugary beverages are loaded with empty calories, meaning they don't provide any nutrition, they simply provide calories. And studies have shown we're just as likely to eat the same amount of food whether we order a sugary drink or we order water. So essentially, we're basically tacking on those calories from the sugary beverage onto the calories that we're going to eat at the meal. This is also a good way to fill up or slow ourselves down when we're eating a meal. If we have a full glass of water while we're waiting for our meal to come, we're going to take that edge off the hunger and not be as likely to overeat. It's also a great way to save money. Sugary beverages like teas and sodas are one of a restaurant's biggest money makers. They can charge $2 to $75, maybe even $3 a glass, where it only costs them pennies to fill up that glass. So by ordering water, maybe adding a lemon slice for a little bit of flavor, is a great way not only to save money, but save calories at that restaurant. Tip number 4 is skip the extras. So what I'm talking about here is all the little extras at a restaurant that would add to the calorie, fat, saturated fat, or sodium content of your meal. If you've taken the time to look up nutrition information online, or perhaps you're looking at the calorie content they have listed on the menu, it's important to be aware that that typically is just the calorie count or nutrition information for the entree. It may not include the sides that come with it, or a salad that you add, or a breadstick that's served out first. All of those extras will be tacked on to that entree total. And this can really send the calorie count, the sodium count, and the saturated fat count pretty high by the end of the meal. So a lot of times skipping the extras is a good idea to keep our overall sodium content in particular, and even calorie content under control at the restaurant. Things like a bread basket. They're delicious, I will admit, but a lot of times our bread is pretty much empty calories. A lot of the white breads that you're served at a restaurant don't have a whole lot of nutrition, and they can actually be a hidden source of sodium. Most of us have had a breadstick at the Olive Garden, but we may not realize that a breadstick at the Olive Garden has over 400 milligrams of sodium, and that's before you even get your entree. Things like desserts are usually very large at a restaurant and are meant to be shared, but even if we share a dessert, we're tacking on a lot of calories and saturated fat to our overall total meal. So planning to avoid the extras, maybe even asking the wait person to leave the bread basket off of the table, may make it easier to stay within our nutrition goals at a restaurant. Tip number 5 is for times where we have not had a chance to look up nutrition information. Maybe we didn't have time, or maybe we're at a restaurant that doesn't have nutrition information. Smaller restaurants that aren't chain restaurants or individually owned restaurants, they probably will not have a nutrition information available. Completing a full nutrition analysis like that is actually pretty expensive, so your smaller locations probably will not have that available. But when we look at the menu, there'll be some clues. There'll be some words on the menu that we can look at to guide us in our choices. Words like creamy, buttery, crispy, golden, deep fried, Parmesan, Alfredo, au gratin. All of these are words. When we see them in a description or the title of an item on a menu, these should be red flags. These words indicate that the food is prepared with extra fat or sauces that would have extra fat. And fats at restaurants tend to be more of the saturated fat. And even if it's not a lot of saturated fat, high-fat meals will also be considerably higher in calories than our meals that are prepared without added fat. So when we look at a menu, we can instead look for keywords that indicate a lower fat method of preparation, like baked or grilled, roasted or poached. Sometimes we can even see categories or sections of the menu that are meant to indicate healthier choices. They may say things like on the light side or smaller plates. We can also be creative when we look at a menu. Sometimes the appetizer section will have some lower fat appetizers that we could order as our meal. We could add some steamed vegetable to that or a side salad to that, and that may be a more appropriate meal. Now in the appetizer section, there will probably only be a few low-fat choices. So I'm not talking about the breaded mozzarella sticks here. I'm talking about seared ahi tuna or maybe a grilled shrimp skewer being a lighter, lower fat option that we could pair with a salad or steamed vegetable. But keep in mind, even low-fat foods may still be high in sodium. Things like smoked salmon or blackened fish, often, while low in fat, will still have that sodium element that we talked about before. Tip number 6, don't be afraid to special order. Most wait persons at a restaurant should be pretty knowledgeable on how your food is prepared. And fat and salt both provide flavor. So even foods that appear healthy or sound healthier will probably have more fat and sodium than we realize. So asking your wait person how the food is prepared will give you a little bit more knowledge, and we might be able to ask that the food be prepared slightly differently. Sometimes, for example, I'll ask that a food be lightly salted or that the salt be left off. They won't always be able to do this, but in certain cases they will. It's important to remember that a lot of times a restaurant has food that comes from their supplier already in stages of preparation, or perhaps they prepare food earlier in the day. So things like soups or sauces are often already prepared, and they're not going to be able to, say, remove the salt from that example. But something that they're going to cook fresh when you order it, like fish, is often cooked when you place that order. It doesn't keep well throughout the day, so they're going to cook it as it's ordered. Then we could special request, say, ask for our fish to be lightly seasoned or for the salt to be left off our steamed vegetables. Those are also usually prepared as soon as they're ordered. Sauces can easily be left off of entrees. Sauces tend to add a lot of sodium and fat. So if we have a cheese and mushroom sauce that goes on top of our chicken, we could ask for that sauce to be left off, or we could ask for it to be served on the side. When they serve it on the side, then we could still use some of it to add some flavor to our chicken, but our chicken won't be covered in that sauce that's probably pretty high in sodium and fat. We could also ask for substitutes. This is a very simple and effective way to reduce the sodium or calorie content of a meal. For example, if my grilled chicken sandwich comes with French fries, often a restaurant will have an option like fresh fruit on their side dish menu. So if I order my grilled chicken sandwich and I ask to substitute fresh fruit in place of the French fries, I'm probably going to shave 300 calories off of that meal and probably about 300 milligrams of sodium with that quick and easy substitution. Just remember, the restaurant is not particularly concerned about your blood pressure or your cholesterol level. They really don't care that you just had a heart attack. Their most important goal is to keep you happy with your experience and make the food taste good so that you want to come back there and spend your money there at their restaurant. So we can take advantage of the fact that that's their ultimate goal to ask for some special requests when we place our order. Tip number 7 is watch the portion size. Of the 10 tips that we're talking about today, this one is the most important in my opinion. This is our opportunity to really recognize that what a restaurant serves you is typically enough for 2 meals. The typical restaurant entree provides between 750 and 1650 calories. That's enough for 2 meals. So there's a couple strategies we can use when we go to the restaurant to help with portion control. One of them is we could ask for a lunch portion, or sometimes a restaurant has a half portion. Couple things to be aware of though. One, if we order a lunch portion during the dinner hour, they're probably going to charge us the full price. So instead, we may want to ask for the full entree, but plan to take part of it home. Another thing to be aware of is half orders are usually not actually half. For example, we can get a full salad at O'Charlie's and it has about 1650 calories. The half portion of that same salad has 1200 calories. Well, I'm no math whiz, but that's not half the calories, is it? So the strategy that I would probably recommend is to plan to share an entree or take half of it home for the next day. That way we're truly splitting the calorie content in half. We're also splitting the sodium amount and the saturated fat amount in half when we share an entree. It took me a while to convince my husband to share a meal with me. I think he thought he was going to waste away. But the reality is, when we share a meal, we both are more comfortable after the meal. We're not overly full or stuffed. Often that can happen if we eat an entire entree. But if I'm with someone and we don't want to share the same meal, another simple trick to do is to plan to take half of that meal home for the next day for, say, lunch to take to work, or even an easy dinner for the next night. Now the food's going to taste good, so stopping at the halfway point may be hard to do. So another easy trick we can do is actually ask for the to-go box when you order your food. That way when they bring you your plate, you can automatically go ahead and cut the amounts in half, put half of it in the to-go box, and then slide that across the table. Now we can finish what's on our plate and only eat half of what was served, and we've got a great lunch that we can take home for the next day. Portion sizes at restaurants have slowly increased over the last 20 or 30 years. And today, we're often served twice as much food as we would have been served in the past. This gradual increase has led to a bit of portion distortion. 20 or 30 years ago, your average spaghetti dish at an Italian type restaurant would have had about a cup of noodles with sauce and 3 small meatballs, and this would have provided about 500 calories. And actually, that calorie count is right in line with appropriate calorie intake. When we look at average calorie needs for people, they vary from person to person based on their height, their weight, their gender, their activity level, and their age. All of those are factors we have to consider when we're looking at how many calories a person needs. But even with all those different factors, typical calorie intakes or needs usually end up somewhere between about 1,800 and 2,400 calories a day. So if we look at having 3 meals in a day and 1 or 2 snacks, about 400 to 600, maybe 650 calories at a meal is going to be an appropriate calorie amount. So 20 or 30 years ago, we were there at about 500 calories. Today, we would be served about twice the amount of food and over 1,000 calories when we order the same type of dish. Now, a very simple thing we could do, I could share this entree with a family member. If I shared the entree and we split it in half, well, now my dish has 512 calories. I'm right back within that appropriate calorie range by applying that simple strategy. The portion size of salads at restaurants has also increased significantly. And when I have a very large salad, I often have a lot of salad dressing, or larger amounts of things like croutons or cheese or blue cheese or bacon crumbles. While the non-starchy vegetables that we find in a salad, the lettuce, the spinach, the tomatoes, the cucumbers, those are all very low calorie density. You could eat quite a large volume of those foods and not consume very many calories at all, or sodium or fat. The toppings that go on salads are actually very calorie dense. Things like salad dressing or cheese, croutons or bacon bits, all of those have a lot of fat and sodium and pack a lot of calories. So if I have a very large salad, I typically need a lot of salad dressing, or there'll be a lot of those toppings. So the calorie content can add up very quickly. And while we feel like we're ordering something healthy when we order a salad, and sometimes we might be, but sometimes those salads have just as much calories or sodium or fat as any other entree on the menu. Here we see a side-by-side example of what you're served at a restaurant compared to what an actual serving would be. At a typical sit-down restaurant, you would be served about 8 ounces in a hamburger patty and a large amount of French fries. That results in a meal that has a lot of calories, over 1,300 calories in that one meal. Where the picture on the right shows what an actual appropriate serving would be, about half that burger and about a third of those fries for more like 600 plus calories. Now, if you and I were served the picture on the right, we'd be wondering who in the back was eating the rest of our hamburger. We've gotten very used to the portion size that we see in the picture on the left. Those larger portions, we've come to expect them when we go to restaurants. But the reality is we need to shift our view of serving sizes and realize that that portion on the right is a more appropriate serving size for a meal. Here is another example of portion distortion, where we compare what you're served at a Mexican type, fast food type restaurant compared to what an appropriate serving size would be. We are served a large burrito and 4 ounces of tortilla chips. The standard serving size for tortilla chips on our nutrition label is 1 ounce. So you're essentially served 4 servings of chips and being told it's your side dish. The reality is 1 ounce of chips and about half of that burrito would put us back closer to an appropriate calorie range in about the 660 range. But again, that's less than half of what you are actually served at the restaurant. Tip number 8 is undress your food. Remember, the sauces and the condiments, the salad dressing in our food is often providing a large amount of the calories, fat, and sodium. So we need to be aware of these high calorie additions and perhaps ask that they be left off or at least served on the side. If we ask for our salad dressing on the side, they typically are going to bring us less than what we would have normally had poured on the salad, but we also have the opportunity to control how much we actually use. We can dip the tines of our fork into that salad dressing and then stab the fork into that lettuce and tomato. We're going to get a little bit of that salad dressing flavor with each bite, but end up using less salad dressing overall. This is a great way to help cut the calorie content and the fat content as well as the sodium content down from some of those entree salads that we talked about earlier. Tip number 9 is eat mindfully, which also means eat slowly. If we eat too quickly, it is very easy to overeat. It actually takes about 20 minutes of eating for your stomach to start to send the signal to your brain that says, hey, I'm getting full, you can stop eating now. Well, 20 minutes is a long time, and if I eat quickly, I could eat a lot of food in 20 minutes. So sometimes we have to slow ourselves down when we eat. Pay attention to the food, savor each bite, and really enjoy the meal. Slowing down allows us to recognize when we're starting to get full. And this way we can learn how to eat until we're not quite full. Now, when I say that, I'll admit that's not an easy thing to do. For most of us, it's a skill that we have to work on and develop. We need to learn to eat until we're satisfied and we're no longer hungry, but we're not quite full yet. Because what's going to happen is as time goes on, I'm going to continue to feel fuller. We probably have all experienced a time where we ate a restaurant meal until we were full, and then on the ride home we realized, oh, I ate too much. That's that 20 minutes we're talking about. So when we slow down and enjoy our food, and eat until we're no longer hungry and we're satisfied, but we're not full yet, we often will avoid the overly full feeling or even indigestion or digestive problems that can occur when we eat too quickly. If we're in the habit of eating quickly, that may be a habit that's hard to break. So we have to think of some little tricks to slow us down. Things like setting your fork down between each bite, taking a sip of that water between each bite, or maybe even thinking about chewing your food 10 times before you swallow it. Now, I know that sounds silly or kind of tedious, but all of these things, or things like eating with your non-dominant hand, all of these things can slow you down at mealtime and allow you to eat until you're not quite full and prevent that overeating that can occur when we eat too quickly. The last tip is to remember the big picture. Think about your nutrition or your dietary goals when you go to a restaurant. Have you been working really hard at weight loss, or have you been lowering your cholesterol level? A lot of times when we keep those goals in mind, it can encourage us to make a good choice at a restaurant. Also remember, moderation is key. If we've been sticking to really good, healthy eating habits on a day-to-day basis, then that allows us on special occasions to really enjoy a food. For most of us, this is going to help encourage a long-term maintenance of a healthy eating plan. Fast food choices are often not very healthy. More often than not, our choices at fast food restaurant are going to be very high in sodium and calories and potentially saturated fat. But with busy lifestyles, fast food is probably going to happen at some point. So I did want to share a few different options. Here on the list, I've got a few breakfast options that would be possible to grab on the go. Just a few healthy options that would be better than a lot of the different choices that we see. Here we have a list of different lunch and dinner options that would be acceptable choices at a fast food restaurant. Now, when I was compiling these lists, I found it was pretty easy to find an entree or side item at different restaurants that was fairly low in calories or saturated fat. But the sodium I really struggled with. Even when we choose items that are healthier, fat and calorie-wise, the sodium content tends to still be very, very high. And I want you to recognize that on these lists, Even though they're decent options, if we ate them on a regular basis, our sodium intake would be too high and could potentially cause problems with our blood pressure or fluid retention issues. So I just want you to be aware, it's almost impossible to get away from the high sodium content at restaurants. So go back to what we talked about at the beginning of the class and really think about how often we're eating out. Even when we try to make healthier choices, we should still be limiting the frequency of our restaurant meals. And what about pizza? Can we eat pizza on a heart-healthy diet? Well, pizza will be higher in fat and saturated fat because of the cheese, as well as sodium. But even pizza can be fit into a healthy eating pattern if we do it the right way. There's a big difference between a thin and crispy pizza with lots of vegetables compared to a thick crust pizza with a lot of meat toppings. Traditional pizza meat toppings are very high in both sodium and saturated fat. And so in one slice of a meat lover's thick crust, there's 330 calories and 18 grams of fat. And that's one slice. Not many people I know eat one slice of pizza. So if we double that, we're looking at 660 calories versus only 360 calories of 2 slices of a thin and crispy veggie lover's pizza. Can make a big difference. All right, let's test our knowledge and see what we've learned today. If we're on the go and we've got to pick something from a fast food restaurant that's low in fat, which one do you think we would choose? The Whopper Jr. with the garden salad and light dressing? Or Zaxby's grilled chicken house salad with 1 packet of ranch? You might be surprised to learn that the hamburger actually has less fat, less saturated fat, and less sodium than the Zaxby's grilled chicken salad. Zaxby's nutrition information is actually kind of interesting. They break down each ingredient of their salad, so you can see the nutrition component of the chicken breast, the lettuce, the tomatoes, the cheese, the Texas toast, all of it's listed separately. And we can see that the grilled chicken breast at Zaxby's actually has 875 milligrams of sodium. That's a lot. So that chicken breast has been probably marinated to make it tender and juicy. But unfortunately, that significantly increases the sodium content of that chicken breast. In this case, the Whopper Jr. with the garden salad and the light dressing would be the better choice. What about desserts? Which one of these desserts do you think would have the least amount of calories? P.F. Chang's New York style cheesecake or their Great Wall of Chocolate? Well, they're both pretty high in calories, but the Great Wall of Chocolate is significantly higher, over 2,000 calories in that dessert. Now, I did have a patient tell me one time, who had had this dessert before, that it's a very shareable dessert. When they bring it to your table, they bring about 3 or 4 spoons with the dessert. It's meant to be shared. But even if I share that dessert with 3 other people, and I divide that number by 4, I'm still tacking on over 500 calories to the meal I've already eaten. That's a lot. So we want to think about desserts, whether it's cheesecake or chocolate. Remember, their portions are pretty large, and we are going to want to split those. But even when we split them, we may want to try to save them for special occasions only because of the high calorie content. And what about sodium? If I'm at Cracker Barrel, this is a popular restaurant among my patients, and I'm trying to find something low in sodium, would I choose the 3 buttermilk pancakes with fruit topping or the egg sandwich with the hash brown casserole? Well, in this case, the egg sandwich and the hash brown casserole has actually less sodium than the pancakes. The pancakes have over 2,000 milligrams of sodium. And you might be thinking, well, where does that come from? Pancakes aren't salty. They don't taste salty. How can they have so much sodium? Well, breads are a hidden source of sodium. When we think about breads, there are 2 types of breads. Breads that use yeast for their leavening agent, yeast breads, And then there's what we call quick breads, and those use baking soda or baking powder as a leavening agent. These would include waffles and pancakes, biscuits and cornbread, and even muffins. So those types of foods will have quite a bit of sodium, more than we anticipate, because both baking soda and baking powder have sodium in them. So in this case, the buttermilk pancakes would have a lot of sodium, and we would be better off with the egg sandwich and the hash brown casserole. In conclusion, I hope today's class has taught you a few new tips and tricks that you can use when you go to the restaurant to try to find healthier options. But I hope you are also considering that number we talked about at the beginning, the number of meals per week that we get from a restaurant. We want to think about how hard it is to eat healthy, how difficult it is to get away from the sodium content when we're at a restaurant, and perhaps be considering cooking more at home and limiting the frequency of those restaurant meals.